everyone. Really great to have you here and surviving these 3 days because it was really overwhelming with so much beautiful art and experiences. I hope you all had a chance to mint some NFTs as well today. How many people actually had a chance to mint an NFT? Can you raise your hand? All right, we got 50%. You still have today. That's great. So today we're joined by some of the pioneering leaders in the space who have led initiatives over the last year to onboard institutions, universities, and museums into the Web3 space to a certain extent, as far as we could go. I'm going to start with a round of introductions, and I'm going to first introduce myself. I'm Aleksandra Art Bernadine. You can call me Aleksandra Art. I have been working in the digital art space with institutions at the intersection of art and technology for the last 6 years. I started working at the top level domain.art, and we had partnerships with Ars Electronica, Rhizome, 7 on 7, Kadaf, and many other sort of like first experimental projects that were helping artists to experience digital tools to showcase their art, but also to connect to a wider audience. Now I work at Join. We're building tools for projects to engage with their communities, and we're providing a different set of Web3 toolkits. I also run Electric Artifacts, which is a curatorial studio helping institutions onboard Web3. I'm going to pass on the word now to Bernadine Brocker.
Thanks, Alex. And yeah, Alex is a huge proponent of digital art since forever. And actually, I think I bought my first Tezos NFT from reading Electric Artifacts and being like, oh, I can do this. And that was back in March 2021. So I'm Bernadine Brocker. I 10 years ago founded an online marketplace called Vastari that is connecting collectors of art, traditional ones, not NFT ones, with museums for exhibitions. And that evolved into also a touring exhibition marketplace. So if you have a show that you can then tour it to multiple locations around the world, but really Web 2, like cloud computing, connecting, matchmaking, messaging, those types of things. And as soon as I heard about blockchain in 2015, I was so enthusiastic about what it could do for the art industry because of this problem of dispersed information and how you don't have one organization that kind of monitors the art information that's around. So it's very hard to know what's true. And so I thought there's a lot of potential there. And it's been amazing to watch what's been growing since there. I guess some of the things that I've done. So in 2018, I helped organize the Art and Tech Summit at Christie's, where some of you might have heard of the Lost Robbies and that kind of stuff that all happened here in London. And then I more recently also did an NFT project with a museum, so I can talk about that later if need be. So that's me.
How many people know about the Lost Robbies? Can you raise your hand? All right, yeah, we have some deep specialists here. Okay, passing on the word to you, Mimi.
Hello, my name is Mimi. I'm a doctoral researcher and also I'm teaching at Imperial College London in the Faculty of Engineering in the Department of Design Engineering. So the aim of this project was to start a research group, which is called Mana Lab, looking into, which is basically coming from my PhD, future of work on blockchain. So I'm trying to onboard some students in the Faculty of Engineering to become blockchain engineers. That's the dream. And I'm also teaching in Central St. Martin's, that's University of Arts London, in the Department of Culture and Enterprise, and where I lead, we kind of kicked it off recently, a CSM NFT lab with a recent series of talks. And again, similarly, I'm trying to onboard or produce NFT artists that are coming from Central St. Martin's, and that's my second dream. And I'm also involved with verse.works, if any of you heard recently. But if not, then do check us out on Twitter.
Yeah, we'll find out more today. And we had a really nice talk with Mimi earlier about her work at Imperial and Central St. Martin. So I really look forward to you sharing more about it today. Chris, would you like to go next?
Thank you. Yeah, so my name's Chris. I'm a chef. You weren't expecting that. So I was a chef. And then I changed careers. It was 16 hours a day, too much. So I studied art and I've been painting for about the last 20 years. I got into Hickenut early last year March when it first started, and that kind of re-energized me into making art again after having losing my studio in Stockwell, and also some of the materials that I used to paint I couldn't buy anymore. So I kind of started to transition into creating my work through digital processes, which was fantastic, and then that got me into NFTs as well. I'm a co-founder of ArtsXR, which is an immersive production studio based in London. One of my fellow co-founders is here, Christina. And we support artists in making immersive technologies for exhibitions, whether that's in VR or we've got an exhibition at the moment called In the Air, which is at the Welcome Collection, where it's a big immersive 360 room in collaboration with Metallurgy Studio, one of the artists duo that we're working with. And I'm also the immersion technologies lead at Camberwell, Chelsea and Wimbledon colleges at University Arts London, where I support academic staff into adopting immersion technologies for the curriculum. So we do a lot of research and development before it gets into the curriculum. That's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chris. So one of the first question and what really brought us here today, I want to ask is, what are some of the challenges we're facing? And just to bear in mind, we had many conversations this week. We talked about sports, we talked about gaming. There are some parallel themes, but what we saw is art seems to be the fastest in terms of adoption rate. And but even so, we kind of see that in some institutions, museums, they're still falling behind in comparison to technological platforms that are introducing art. So maybe I would love to hear your thoughts, and maybe Mimi, you could start because you work really closely with students. What are some of the patterns you're seeing?
So what I felt with the challenges, the main challenges for basically what we're talking about, Web3, but mass adoption, is that there is no demand. So sometimes I feel that we do live in a bubble. So, when there was the Brexit election, you'd go on Twitter and then, you look through your Twitter and everyone was voting for Jeremy Corbyn. I was like, yeah, he's going to win. But it's because the algorithm kind of shows that. And it's the same happening with my Twitter right now. I just see NFTs everywhere, which is great. But the truth is slightly different. So I can bring the best speakers to the universities and my students don't really know who are the speakers. And that shocked me last year when I brought Arthur Brightman. I think he was here as well. And, unless I force them to show up to the guest lecture, they wouldn't, because they don't know who is the person, who is Tezos. And then I did a second trial. I brought Kathleen Brightman. I had 5 students from my course out of 80 across 2 years. So then I kind of brought the fashion guys and I forced them to sign the attendance sheets. So we're really trying to introduce students to the NFT space, but what they read on not our algorithmic curated Twitter, but on news, it's quite negative. So I think there is a witch hunt basically on mass media, and that is one of the challenge that it's not just about NFTs, but it's the same with blockchain. So I remember once I brought a VC investor to my Imperial students, and he just started his talk with, how many of you know what is blockchain? And with 70 students in the classroom, and one person said it's a Ponzi scheme. And that's as far as it goes. It's Faculty of Engineering. I'm like, guys, read some tech news. And yeah, so I think that the biggest challenge for us educators is that we can be fascinated about something and passionate about something, but it doesn't mean that the students will adopt it. And it happens with any innovation. So, when people were talking about Instagram to me back then, I didn't see a point in Instagram. If anyone asked me a few years ago if I paid for Spotify, I'd say no. Why would I do it? So I think we kind of have to slowly introduce that, and hopefully once we see good cases, good use cases, and of course accessibility, user experience that is being resolved by all of this nerdy technical setup, then hopefully one day we'll see more students that are entering the space. It's also quite risky for them because as a graduate, of course, it's better to get a job at Goldman Sachs than in a Web3 company if you don't know if it's going to survive next year. So we just have to have more role models. that are coming from the traditional world, like, again, Goldman Sachs people that are shifting their careers. For example, Ian Rogers, right? He left LVMH to Ledger, and that's one of the examples. I introduce him to my students at Imperial. I do want to show that, guys, it is doable. This is a real company. He's a real person with amazing career, and he decided to switch to Web3.
Yeah, definitely role models. Chris, could you add, because you also work with students, you work a lot on research. Do you see similar patterns taking place?
Yeah, well, with immersion technologies, what I found is, so as an example, virtual reality, we started exploring through research and development very informally, totally outside the curriculum, with a bunch of students that were basically saying, I want to do VR. I can't do it. Where can I do it? So I formed a collective called the Digital Maker Collective, back in 2015, where we started to basically just get a headset and just sit around the table and just explore the technology together. That was back in 2015. And since then, that research and development has carried on to the point where I'm working with illustration course at Camberwell now, where we've been doing research and development in there for like a year and a half. And we're still not in the curriculum yet. So, this is a long journey. And, we're just at the point where we're going to be working with Gravity Sketch to do a curriculum integration, which I think is fantastic. So, in terms of Web3, we are literally just at the beginning of having the conversations. And I guess it kind of goes down to approach, what is the best approach? And I found different flavors for different kind of cohorts and colleges, but the student-led sort of, give them the technology and, let students sort of lead the way, if you like, and sort of inform the institution, I think is a really exciting way to go forward, but it's not always that practical in terms of curriculum integration. So, I think working with staff and getting staff comfortable with the technology. And I think that's where we're at now. So, at the moment, I'm using lots of Mimi's lovely resources, videos that are on Central St. Martin's YouTube channel. They're really good to point to students. But I think what we're doing is having roundtable conversations around Web3 and trying to just feel out, what are the challenges. And we're in that position.
Can I add something? Because Chris just inspired me when you use the word research and curriculum. So one of the challenges is research takes time. So, I started one study 3 years ago, and it's being published hopefully next month. It takes 3 years to publish an academic paper. So naturally, you can't really talk about science, education, and Web3, because literally, NFT space is quite young. So even if I start a study right now and I start to write a paper, it will be published in 3 years and nothing is related anymore. I started a study about remote working 2 years ago before COVID. There wasn't a word Zoom even. So if you read the paper right now, it's very outdated, it doesn't make sense, but it's still going to be published. And I think that's the problem of science and with academia, that academia takes so much time. So when Chris is saying about curriculum, we're trying to change the handbook right now for our course at Central St. Martin's. It's 2 years to change one module. And, the space is so fast, we can't really keep up with that. So we can do things around, but to really have it in a curriculum and get acceptance of all the layers of academic institutions, because it's not just Central St. Martin's, UAL, and it's, of course, some other institutions involved in that, external examiners. It's 2 years to change the curriculum. And then by then, things are not relevant. And I think, Bernadine, you can say more about institutions here as well.
Yeah. I just wanted, Bernadine, you sort of have a tap on the market and how fast it's changing and has been changing over the years. Maybe you could talk a bit more.
No, I completely agree with what Mimi was saying. And I think I've seen it from a different point of view. So more talking to the stakeholders at museums, like when they saw that the British Museum did this NFT sale with La Collection, like, oh, should we be doing something like this? Or when Christie sold the Beeple, like, oh, other selling institutions saying, should we be doing something like this? And I think that there are a lot of issues that have to do a bit with risk management, I guess. So the same that students are saying, well, if I train in Web3 and be a blockchain engineer, am I going to get a job? Because is this just a Ponzi scheme? It's the same, which actually, by the way, there are so many jobs for blockchain engineers. If you can train for that, please, even just knowing what NFTs are, you'll get great paying jobs. But the other side is just on the institutional side. I feel like the way that these risk-averse institutions approach it is often first through education. So with Christie's, we were in 2018 able to do a conference about blockchain and the arts, and that was acceptable because it was more about learning than about actually doing. But we saw the results 3 years later, right? The Beeple sold 3 years later in 2021. So I feel like it's worth investing in that education of those institutions and getting them to kind of think about it. But then there are also just really practical stumbling blocks. Like a very large media organization wanted to work with us on an NFT project, and just the legal process to try and get them. You don't want to be a financial advisor, so you do not want to be doing cryptocurrency on behalf of a large media organization, but they try to outsource that to you. That kind of stuff, you can't. So I think institutions are not able to have a crypto wallet right now easily. So it's just that's changing also. MetaMask institutional, right? It's all changing. But I think that there are a lot of practical issues that are still happening that cause the risk-averse nature of institutions with this space. And to sum it up, education is probably the first way in, but make sure you get paid for it, because I don't know about all of you, but there's a lot of people wanting just free advice and everything. So if you are starting to set up a business, a startup, etc., you can just burn all of the cash that you raise teaching people about stuff rather than actually building. So just be careful about that. Yeah.
I think really good points mentioned. So when we talk about challenges, it's the fact that there is no framework so far, legal and financial, for larger institutions to onboard. The educational part, so like you both are working on materials that can be introduced for new people onboarding, but also how do we stimulate demand? And I think in terms of stimulating demand, maybe I would love to hear, like, we can start again with you, Mimi. What has worked, like, over your last couple of years, trying to introduce the materials and this new subject at institutions and universities? Like, do you see a change taking place?
I think with any innovation, what will work is the use case. So unless we can actually see the use case right now for the students, if you read news, or like for collectors, when I speak to collectors and I treat, traditional art collectors, when they buy stuff from Freeze, they would put it on the wall. When they buy NFTs, they would tell their friends, other collectors, hey, I bought this NFT and I sold it for this amount. And, I onboarded my colleague who's teaching at Central St. Martin's on Tuesday. She got her first POAP. Her first question when she got it was like, how much can I sell it for and when? So people treating NFT still as an investment vehicle, less as an art piece. And the first use case that I really found fascinating that worked with my student was POAP, so proof of attendance, because I struggle personally with attendance list. Because, you have 20 people in the room and actually on the list 60. So POAP is this unique moment when it just makes sense for them to scan and I can easily see how many POAPs has been minted. And it was just like a fun thing. We got Ledger involved and Lucas from POAP, who came and introduced the whole concept of setting up a wallet on Rainbow, how you can do that. And the success is that when we got a degree show at Central St. Martin's, my students did have a POAP for their own show. So everyone who came to see the installation could mint their own NFTs. And a lot of people who actually came and minted said that we came from the series of talks that you did. So we already have a wallet ready and we can do it. So unless we see something that actually is useful and not just, an investment tool, then I hope, we're closer to this mass adoption.
Has anyone actually, so how many people know what's a POAP or have a POAP? Can you raise your hands? Okay, so for the other half, so POAP is something that, it's a token. It's actually a fungible token. It's used on the same contract, and it's different issue for different events. When you attend an event, even this event, you basically scan a QR code and you receive in your wallet a form of like an image. It can be a logo, it can be a special artwork, and it's basically you're recording the point of time that you you attended this thing. But what's beautiful about it is that moving on, if, for example, the institution that hosted the event wants to do a certain giveaway or wants to reward people for attendance, it can connect with you and either do an airdrop or transfer you something. So I think it's for free in most cases so far. And I think it's a really interesting way to get people involved. And I think also like this way of onboarding people through free initiatives is something that we're seeing also at Art Basel. We're seeing this here, like you're able to mint FX hash tokens, because when crypto comes in and when you actually have to go on an exchange and purchase it and then set up your wallet, this is where there is some friction. And so just moving forward, I guess to my next question is, Bernadine, you worked on a project with a museum last year. It was a really pioneering project. Maybe you could tell us a bit more how you helped them set all of these steps
sure,
out.
I can. So what we did, we used the Tezos protocol for this project, and it was a project done with the Whitworth Museum or Gallery in Manchester. And they are planning an exhibition in 2023, in the summer of 2023, about economics. And so they wanted, this NFT sale wasn't, actually let me backtrack. One of the things that I think is really important if you're a museum thinking about doing stuff with NFTs is to think why. Like, what am I actually trying to do? If you're just minting NFTs that are JPEGs of things from your collection, you're selling postcards or posters or whatever you want to say. And then the fact that people are paying such high prices for that is a bit questionable. So if you have an actual reason to do it and more of some kind of meaning, then it starts making more sense why you're doing this NFT. So when we spoke to the Whitworth, they wanted to do this for their Economics, the Blockbuster exhibition. And what they created is a limited edition NFT project. One of the most important pieces in their collection is William Blake's Ancient of Days, which is they were actually originally hand-colored prints. So it's kind of like the idea a little bit of NFTs of having a multiple, but it's uniquely touched by the artist, etc. But they didn't want to mint JPEGs of that work. They wanted to showcase the research that the university does, etc. And they wanted to show some of the digital assets that don't necessarily always get shown. So the John Rylands Library in Manchester helps with research with scanning the work, using medical equipment so they can check the pigment and look at this type of stuff. And the images are a bit like psychedelic, like Pink Floyd poster type of thing, because of all the medical equipment. So they decided to mint one of the outputs from these medical scans of artworks rather than a photo of the piece. And it showcases the research that they're doing in the university while also raising funds for the exhibition, while also creating something that's time-stamped, so whoever bought it, you kind of have a trail of who's supporting this project. But of course, they had to talk to the University of Manchester, they had to talk to the John Rylands, they had a lot of issues with copyright and whether this was allowed, and all of these types of things that you have to jump through to be able to do a project like this. But what is amazing is, because it's on the blockchain, no matter what happens at the Whitworth, if the exhibition doesn't happen, if the director changes, if the curator changes, if whatever, this project is going to have a life of its own forever. And we can see what happens to these tokens. Like, are they going to go up in value? Are they going to actually go down in value? Will people cherish them? And that's part of the whole concept of the exhibition about economics, because you have a question of what is the value of these pieces. So that was a long story, wasn't it? But hopefully it made people, if you want to look at it, it's called the Ancient of Days NFT. It's now on object.com. It was originally on Hic et Nunc. So yeah, and that was with the Whitworth.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing it. I think it's important for museums to try and experiment, and it doesn't have to be always extremely complex. You're not competing, obviously, with like people in the
and that's one thing also. They didn't want to have a headline of like, we raised millions with this NFT project. That wasn't their goal. Their goal was to show how NFTs could potentially be used differently. And I think that a lot of the museum projects are actually like going back to the investment thing, are being said, we have to get a huge fundraising amount, or it has to be $1 million project, or it's a failure. And I think we need to normalize it. It's just normal projects that you can do.
I think also like talking about motivation and talking about the need for it. Like today, I don't know if people know this artist. It looks like an NFT actually, but it's Maria Primachenko, who's a traditional Ukrainian artist. She has passed away. And most recently in Ukraine, given the circumstances, one of her museums was destroyed and 50 of her works, national treasure, burned down. And so last month I was at a conference in Austin in America. It was called Consensus. And a lot of panels were talking about DeFi, but also there was an element of web3 and NFTs. And the sort of like the Minister of Technological Innovation actually flew in from Ukraine together with the head of Blockchain Association for Ukraine. And they made an announcement that they're working on a project to digitize Ukrainian cultural heritage. And they're putting it on the blockchain because, as we saw in recent months, you can hack a database, you can destroy physical, but using decentralized technology will be actually a way to prove provenance and history and keep it on the record. So I see a very strong use case, being originally from Ukraine, in sort of like these things that are changing and like wiping out history. And I sort of like wanted to ask you, Chris, from point of view as an artist, but also as a researcher, what are some of the sort of like other motivations you think could push forward a wider adoption across institutions for embracing Web3?
Yeah, great, thank you. It kind of, I had an answer in my head as well from what was talked about, and it kind of relates anyway, so it's good, the word. So one of the most interesting conversations I've had around Web3 was with artist-run gallery in London. I'm not sure if I can name it. Yeah, Beaconsfield Gallery in London, who we've been collaborating with. And sitting down with the gallery owners and their artists in residence, and so having this conversation around the relationship, you know, what kind of gallery it is. It's a community gallery, you know. It's and I think it was just really interesting seeing their perspectives on this and how they could potentially see how it could work for them, and quite a contrast really from the normal conversation, which is really commercial art and commercial art galleries. So I think that's a really interesting area, and we'll see where that goes. But it also made me reflect a little bit about, so when I became a Tate Exchange Associate back in 2017, we basically run events at Tate Modern with the Digital Maker Collective, where over 5 years, and the associate group was made up of, like, I don't know, there was about 70 institutions that were kind of in this sort of very democratic space, which was quite revolutionary for Tate Modern to do. And that ended with the pandemic. So there's 2 points really. There's one around archiving and using the sort of blockchain to archive a lot of the stuff that went on. I think it'd be quite interesting. But the thing that's really interesting me, and I don't know enough about it yet, but I want to explore it, is our DAOs, basically. You know, would the Tate Exchange Associate Group would have been a perfect DAO, basically? Would the Digital Maker Collective be a perfect DAO? Would a university be a DAO? I don't know. Could it be a DAO? Could it operate as a DAO? I don't know. So, you know, I think for me, they're the interesting areas to start to explore next.
Actually, that's really interesting. There was a panel just before us about DAOs. I don't know if many of you caught it, because I don't know still if there's like a perfect use, like a case study of a DAO where voting works, because it's all about participation. You just reminded me about Tate last year. I did that talk for the Young People's Program at Tate, and after the talk, like, we had a conversation, and half of the class was like, "I still don't get it. Like, if you kill someone in Decentraland, can you get all their NFTs? Like, how does this work?" But then, like, the other half of people were like, "Hey, Alex, I'm dropping this NFT collection. Like, do you have any advice which chain is the best to use?" So, like, you can clearly see that, like, some people are like already deeply jumping on it. Others are still taking their time. But maybe in terms of DAOs, is that something that Central St. Martin's is looking into?
That's a very sensitive topic for me because I am personally against DAOs. So I'm researching creativity in teamwork at Imperial, and it makes sense for DAOs. The stories is like, of course, when Pixar had Steve Jobs, they decided to not have Steve Jobs involved in the meetings because he would just kind of overkill the conversation and it wouldn't be as creative as possible. So in terms of creative teams, I think DAOs are quite cool to be used as a mechanism for ideation. But on the other side, in terms of education, if we really run a university as a DAO, then we'll all just be sitting and eating jelly cakes. So that's what I think in terms of participatory design, self-governance. It's very risky because, again, I mean, I don't know why I keep talking about elections. It's because I'm from Poland. And again, we don't have enough European students after Brexit. So if there is no layer of due diligence, of course, ICO crash, crypto winter crash, and even right now we're seeing a lot of companies are dropping or bankrupting because there wasn't like a right level of due diligence checking up credibility of these organizations. And similarly, if we really run everything with asking community and people, then Brexit happens. So I believe that DAOs are a great tool for some stages in running projects, but not decision taking maybe, because it goes back to philosophy. Like there is asymmetry of information. Like not everyone knows everything, so it's very risky to just ask people about their tastes. I was joking. The same, especially in terms of artistic institutions. We want to get out of this, the stigma of producing art that looks like IKEA curtains. Because this is a mass taste, and we really don't want to produce us as an art university. So we want to get out of it and understand the concept of gatekeepers, professors being, very bad people who are pushing students, especially in the fashion department. But then you have Aleksandra McQueen's coming out. So I do believe that we need to find and strike a right balance. I personally don't have a solution for that, so I think we can test with different initiatives and see where it works best.
Yeah.
I think just picking up on that and, the idea of DAOs within the universities, for instance, I think one of the most interesting things, again, that I'm seeing, so Chelsea College of Art, famous for producing artists, and got some amazing design courses. Camberwell, design, craft-based, and then we've got a performance school at Wimbledon. What's really interesting is we built the art school on these discipline-specific subjects, and it's quite interesting now seeing that the boundaries of disciplines are merging in this space, and I think seeing how that's going to unfold and how it's going to actually change the art school as it is, basically. And also, we've developed new courses where, a bit like the Digital Maker Collective was accommodating or trying to support the students that wanted to do digital that wasn't in their courses. So obviously we're seeing new digital courses starting to evolve as well. But I think it's really important just to look at to look at those sort of traditional, like ceramics. The first thing when you go to Cambodia, you see ceramics. What's the relevance to ceramics and Web3? And I think having that conversation with the students and with the staff is super interesting.
I basically heard, like we've talked about this before, that there's some experiments with universities issuing degrees using NFTs, and so this area is a very standalone use case where one university, one institution gives it a try. But I know, Bernadine, you've been working for a long time. We've been part of the study group for identification standards. And what's your opinion about standalone experiments versus working towards one standard that all the universities can adopt?
Yeah, I think a lot of the lessons that are happening with people who are involved with Web3 is that you get experiences firsthand that normally you would get if you've been in a career for 30 years. So listing a company, you would probably need to be working a really long time, and then you get the opportunity of trying to list a company and see how it goes. With an NFT offering, you're almost listing a company. You're like building up the hype, you're doing a deck, you're showing how it's everything. I feel like there is a whole generation of people that has been involved with Web3 that have skills and things and thoughts that you normally would have at a much later stage in life. So I'm really interested to see how those experiences are going to filter into the professional life. And similarly with decision making and this type of stuff, talking about DAOs versus being quite harsh. Like anyone who was involved with the drama with Hic et Nunc last year saw firsthand how you have this kind of balancing act and governance and all of these issues that need to be involved. And the project that you're talking about is the art identification standard, which is like a consortium of companies that are trying to create a standard identifier for art. So you know that this is not the same art in a digital context. And it's 45 companies who've come together to start putting this into some kind of standard. But there is so much, there's a reason for all the bureaucracy, I guess, to a certain extent. And then there's also sometimes that you get exasperated and say, gosh, can we not just push forward and just do it? So I think there's a balancing act between making sure that people feel included, that you're listening to all of the different voices, and that you are making decisions based on facts from around. But also at some point, someone needs to pull the trigger. And that's one of the problems with completely decentralized, completely DAO-based decision-making. You can sometimes have the issue with pulling the trigger, I think.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
We're on board together, so
no one wants to take the blame. So before my last question, do we have any questions from the audience while all the speakers are still here, about universities, about museum adoption, about institutions? I think we have one.
Is it on? Okay, great. Thank you. Hi, I'm Matthew Plummer-Fernandez. I run one of the new courses at UAL in computational arts. And so for me, it's been really interesting to hear, we talk about sort of universities adopting Web3, and I just wondered what your thoughts were on introducing it to students specifically, getting them to, they want to hear about NFTs, they want to learn about it, of course. But it comes with a sort of responsibility as a course tutor to, acknowledge they'll have to open up wallets and start trading and stuff like that. I'm really curious as to what your stance is on that.
I could definitely answer that. So very cautious, I think. And I think the initial I've approached it in two ways, really. Like with the Digital Maker Collective back in sort of April last year, we did a very informal minting party with the collective, and that felt quite like a safe space for us to, because we were a collective, and it was kind of outside the curriculum. Going into the curriculum, I'm having conversations with program directors, and basically, I always try and make sure that they take the lead and that they are the sort of initiator of whatever innovation is going to happen within the curriculum, obviously. And what was quite interesting was the program director brought in a solicitor, and it just felt straight away from the beginning that we were kind of having these conversations around intellectual property rights, data, which is just obviously a massive sort of issue, and the biggest thing, which is the idea of academics giving financial advice to but I think the way forward that we're going to do it is to have these kind of research and development roundtable discussions where we kind of air all these issues. And it is kind of specific to the discipline for this. It might be very specific to a discipline. That's how we're doing it. Thanks.
One more question in the front.
Yeah, thanks for this. So what I understood is that you're making these offers to a particular cohort or department in universities. My impression is that development in this space is incredibly cross-disciplinary. So I wonder if you can maybe kill two birds with one stone, up your student interest by reaching out across schools and campuses. I mean, I have an economics background. I've only just sort of pivoted. I'm one of these conventional people who's just pivoting into the sector. And I'm just all these light bulbs are going off about stuff that I studied 14 years ago that is suddenly becoming relevant, and suddenly like an economics degree is not just a way into a bank, it's a way into creating a new fashion empire or running a galactic space empire in a game. And there are all of these things that students will not cross students' minds because academia is so slow moving. So anyway, my bit over. I'm just wondering if you've thought about making the pitch a bit more cross-disciplinary like that.
So we're actually planning something super exciting for November. Someone reached out to me from former CAS Business School, and that was following what happened at Imperial. And I was like, I really like what you're doing at Imperial. Can I bring my CAS blockchain society? And I was like, yeah, of course, because I need some mass, the critical mass of people who attend the event. Like, I can't just run it in my own faculty. The problem that I got was like when I reached out to the computer science faculty, they didn't get back to me. So I was like, I'm just going to run it in my own department. So like if we cannot really trust our own universities because we don't really get support from other courses, it's a lot of politics in these institutions, then I'm going across universities now. So what we're going to do in November is across LSE, LBS, London Business School, CAS, Imperial. I'm bringing Oxford on board as well. They had a conference a few weeks ago sponsored by Algorand, and there's the department called Oxford Internet Institute. They're really into blockchain as well. So we're going to start with like a small dinner club. So PhDs from Imperial and Oxford are going to meet every month, have a nice meal and talk about research. But actually it is leading up to this big event that is across all these university blockchain societies. And I have one job for this. They said, if you can get someone from Goldman Sachs, all the students will show up. I'm like, okay, I'll get Goldman Sachs and then Coinbase's. But if I bring head of crypto Coinbase, no one will show up. So we still have to merge that between traditional institutions, bring some big names, and then bring students slowly onboarding them across universities. And I think, I'm quite excited for that.
Bernadine, do you want to?
That made me think of so many things, from the fact that you need to have like one of these names, big names to attract people, etc. But one of the things that I was thinking about when you talked about cross-disciplinary is a lot of the initiatives within institutions are grassroots. So maybe one person that really likes this concept and wants to do a project, or one museum director who thinks this is really interesting, etc. But the problem is that there's not enough information at the top layer of people understanding why this is interesting. And you can't get really significant funding for this type of thing unless you get buy-in at that level. So I think one of the things that the Web3 community needs to think about as well is kind of like, you can be grassroots, but how do we make sure that story that's in the media about this being a Ponzi scheme, that there's no real value to it, etc., that gets cut through, and that people understand that beyond all that top layer of hype, there's actually technology that's really promising that we can build new infrastructures on. And I think that's definitely an area where a lot of work needs to be done to get people to understand it. And maybe some economists can write some papers about that type of stuff.
I think just to add to that, I think starting a conversation around NFTs I found is the wrong approach. Even though everyone thinks about NFTs and they want to know about NFTs, I think starting the context around Web3 and the opportunities within Web3, rather than focusing too much on the NFT side of it, and kind of contextualizing where NFT fits into Web3, and that there's a lot more going on.
And actually on that, like the context with also VR and AR and other forms of technology, where actually these rails can facilitate a lot of new, really interesting business models and collaborations for things within VR, AR, etc.
But no one knows what is Web3. No one knows what's Web3. I had 3 talks about NFTs. The third one later came, and then someone was like, wait a minute, how many of you know what is Web3 to my students? And one person raised a hand. So that's the main challenge.
Actually, I gave a talk earlier this week at Royal Academy where that was the first part, was like, this is Web 1, this is Web 2, this is Web 3. And I think that is probably one of the big things that helps put the context in. Yeah, for sure.
So if anyone doesn't know what's Web3, let's all Google this afterwards and we'll have a great takeaway from today's talk. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you for your questions, everyone. I hope you enjoyed our talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much.